Welcome back to the Think See Listen channel, where I give it to you raw and uncut and uncensored, unedited and completely unprofessional. All to give glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We're jumping right back into it. The Great Reset and the War for the World by my Uncle Alex Jones. Uncle Jones teach us about the Great Reset. I guess we'll get right back to it. Let's see. It's at moments like this when the question can be answered, what will the globalists do to those who don't agree with them? The answer, they'll try to ruin them, as the Wall Street Journal piece reported. That didn't please the lockdown consensus enforced by public health officials and the press. Dr. Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, until Sunday, sent an email on October 8, 2020, to Dr. Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. The proposal from the three fringe epidemiologists seems to be getting a lot of attention and even a co-signature from Nobel Prize winner Mike Leavitt at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises, Dr. Collins wrote. Is it underway? It's difficult to read this opinion piece from the Wall Street Journal and come away with anything but the impression that these alleged scientists are not any different from warring mafia dons or corporate raiders using underhanded tactics to take down the competition. In the 19th century, when there was a dispute over who should be given credit for the theory of natural selection, Charles Darwin or Alfred Russel Wallace, a public debate was held in London, England by the Linnean Society on July 1st, 1858, to settle the question. Would it have been so difficult in 2020 to have these scientists debate the issues of lockdowns and other public health measures on a 3-hour public Zoom call? Millions would have tuned into that debate, and we would have all been better informed. The Wall Street Journal opinion piece continued their critique. These researchers weren't fringe, and neither was their opposition to quarantining society, but in the panic over the virus, these two voices of science used their authority to stigmatize dissenters and crush debate. A week after his email, Dr. Collins spoke to the Washington Post about the Great Barrington Declaration. This is a fringe component of epidemiology, he said. This is not mainstream science. It's dangerous. His message spread, and the alternative strategy was dismissed in most precincts. This effort by Collins and Fauci can seem puzzling to the average person, but when you view it through the lens of globalism and technocracy, the idea that scientists, engineers, and managers are best situated to make the important decisions in society, it all becomes clear. They don't believe in free and open debate because they don't trust you to make the right decision. This becomes remarkably clear in a bizarre statement made by Dr. Fauci as he found himself under attack by a few brave Republicans and media outlets. On CBS, Dr. Fauci said Republicans who criticize him are really criticizing science because I represent science. That's dangerous. He isn't science, and it's also dangerous for scientific officials to mobilize to quash dissent, without which it's easy to make tragic mistakes. A scientific debate over pandemic policy was and still is in the public interest, especially during a once in a century plague. Rather than try to manipulate public opinion, the job of health officials is to offer their best scientific advice. They shouldn't act like politicians or censors, and when they do, they squander the public's trust. It's articles like this one from the Wall Street Journal that confirm my belief that much more was going on with COVID 19 than we were led to believe. Fauci and Collins strike me as a little different than the generals who lied about our progress on Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. For the sake of clarity, let me tell you what I consider to be the most likely explanations for what happened during the COVID 19 crisis. I consider the most likely scenario to be that COVID 19 was released on purpose by the globalists to terrify us into accepting their authoritarian rule, complete with dangerous vaccines that would kill or maim a large part of the population, requiring further government support. I consider the second most likely scenario to be that there was an accidental escape of this pathogen from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the globalists saw it as an opportunity to implement their long cherished plans of global governance. I consider the least likely scenario to be that this was somehow a natural outbreak in Wuhan, China, especially since the bats who carry the precursor to this virus lived hundreds of miles away, and that the authorities and globalists were taking the measures they did because they genuinely believed they were justified by the unprecedented nature of the emergency. In what follows, I will not argue for scenario number one or two, even though I believe either to be the most likely explanation. When people engage in horrendous violations of the public's trust, as they did during the Vietnam War, Iraq, and Afghanistan, it can take decades before the majority of the public sees the truth clearly. Nobody likes to believe they've been betrayed by their leaders. It isn't because people are stupid that they believe so many of the lies of our ruling class. It's because they're good people who get up and do the hard work of society with honor and dignity. They cannot imagine the minds of those who do not do the same. They require an overwhelming amount of evidence to finally accept that certain people are evil. Therefore, I'm not going to deal with the question of whether SARS-CoV-2 was a man-made organism released either intentionally or by accident. I'm going to treat the COVID-19 crisis as an act of God, like an earthquake or flood, and show you that even under this generous interpretation, the globalists have embraced a terrifying plan for humanity's future. The lockdowns in our country started in March 2020, but on July 9th, 2020, Klaus Schwab, with a new co-author, Terry Mallert, published a new book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, searching desperately for a way to rebrand his globalist agenda. The Fourth Industrial Revolution never took off as a catchy idea, so maybe The Great Reset would have more luck. However, Klaus Schwab couldn't avoid his tendency to engage in literary gee whiz. Ain't technology brought to you by really smart people great? And did I mention we need a new political system to handle all these changes? Let's start with the cheery introduction. At the time of writing, June 2020, the pandemic continues to worsen globally. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. Nothing will ever return to the broken sense of normalcy that prevailed prior to the crisis, because the coronavirus pandemic marks a fundamental inflection point in our global trajectory. Some analysts call it a major bifurcation. Others refer to it a deep crisis of biblical proportions, but the essence remains the same. The world as we know it is it the world as we know it in the early months of 2022 is no more dissolved in the context of the pandemic. We're now more than 2 years past the time Schwab was writing, and I want you to think about how he claims the world has forever changed. Let me ask you, are you still married to the same person? Do your dogs still need to be walked, and does the litter box for the cat still need to be emptied? Much of your life probably seems the same, except for the insane people wearing their masks as they drive alone in their cars, or the expensive gas and the inflation at the supermarkets. But that's not because of COVID-19. Those are man-made problems brought about by bad decisions at the top level of our government, and you don't need to be an insurrectionist to believe that. Schwab doesn't even claim that the world before the pandemic was good, as shown by snarky lines like, "Nothing will ever return to the broken sense of normalcy that prevailed prior to the crisis." Can somebody who isn't clinically insane tell me what's meant by that line? You thought the time before the pandemic was normal, but in reality it was broken? Is that like the old joke about there being no such thing as military intelligence, business ethics, or jumbo shrimp? The book is divided into 3 sections, with the first being titled Macro Reset. You see, it wasn't enough to just be a reset or even a great reset. It had to be a macro reset to really get your attention. See how skillfully you're being manipulated by really smart people? And who is coming to save the day? It's not any single person, it's big government. What a surprise. In the words of John Micklethwait and Adrian Woolridge, the COVID-19 pandemic has made government important again, not just powerful again. Look at those once mighty companies begging for help, but also vital again. It matters enormously whether your country has a good health service, competent bureaucrats, and sound finances. Good government is the difference between living and dying. One of the great lessons of the past 5 centuries in Europe and America is this: acute crises contribute to boosting the power of the state. It's always been the case, and there is no reason why it should be different with COVID-19. Just wait a Texas minute here. Can you believe Klaus Schwab is saying that in every acute crisis of the past 5 centuries in Europe or America, it was the governments that provided the solution? These people do not like individual action or achievement. Their hatred for strong individuals literally oozes out of them. How about this line? Look at those once mighty companies begging for help. Does that seem like something a psychologically well-balanced person would say? And just for my sake, can anybody point me to a single country in the history of the world that can be said to have had competent bureaucrats? To me, it seems that the best life is achieved by maximum avoidance of any government bureaucrats. I'll take sending a package from the UPS store over a U.S. postal office any day of the week, even if it costs me a little more. Efficiency matters, and we shouldn't grumble if we have to pay a little more for it. Schwab's intention in writing these books seems to be to make you feel powerless and beg for his chain of authority to be placed around your neck so you can be ridden like some domesticated animal. Consider how optimistic and upbeat you feel after reading this passage. If no one power can enforce order, our world will suffer from a global order deficit. Unless individual nations and international organizations succeed in finding solutions to better collaborate at the global level, we risk entering an age of entropy in which fragmentation, anger, and parochialism will increasingly define our global landscape, making it less intelligible and more disorderly. The pandemic crisis has both exposed and exacerbated this sad state of affairs. The magnitude and consequence of the shock it has inflicted are such that no extreme scenario can now be taken off the table. It's taken 2.5 books, but Schwab, in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, laid out his plan to deal with the dissidents. No extreme scenario can now be taken off the table. What might those extreme scenarios be? The shutting down of opposing voices on social media? Deleting a person's email list? Cutting off a person's access to financial payment services? Denying banking services to an individual because of their political beliefs? Using law enforcement agencies like the FBI or IRS to harass the dissidents? The creation of detention camps to utilize for those who deny health mandates or simply protest the plans of the government? The mass execution of those who defy government orders? Do any of these seem too extreme? Schwab himself wrote that no extreme scenario shall now be taken off the table. When people tell you their plans, I suggest you listen to what they say. I cannot presume the slightest bit of goodwill when Schwab writes that no extreme scenario can now be taken off the table. It's like hiring an employee who tells you he's been fired from his previous jobs because all his bosses were jerks, or starting to date a woman who tells you she's never quite managed the monogamy thing. When the end comes, you really shouldn't be surprised. However, like a frog being slowly cooked to death in a pot of water placed over a low flame, you might not notice the creeping heat of global tyranny until it's too late. That's why you probably need Schwab to put it all in perspective for you. Global governance is commonly defined as the process of cooperation among transitional actors aimed at providing responses to global problems, those that affect more than one state or region. It encompasses the totality of institutions, policies, norms, procedures, and initiatives through which nation states try to bring more predictability and stability to their responses to transnational challenges. This definition makes it clear that any global effort on any global issue or concern is bound to be toothless without the cooperation of national governments and their ability to act and legislate their aims. Color me skeptical, but I'm not seeing Schwab put any limits on what governments can do to their citizens, or the pressure to be applied to average people by institutions, policies, norms, procedures, and initiatives. Their plans sound reminiscent of some take-it-or-leave-it big tech contract when you want their new phone, computer, or app. The best case scenario, if you defy them, is you might end up with without an internet connection, a phone, a bank account, or a job. From history, we have learned the worst case scenario for those who defy authoritarian control. They end up in jail, brutally tortured, and often dead. As we continue, I will show you exactly how Klaus Schwab and his cronies are putting in just such a system. They want you to believe it's for your own good, or if it's for the children, or to save the sea turtles. They know better than you do because they're smart. And whom did Schwab choose to praise the COVID-19 crisis? Not the scientific dissidents such as those who signed the Great Barrington Declaration, who would never have sent elderly people with the virus back into nursing homes. The same dissidents who would have made the decision to allow the use of drugs like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, given their decades-long history of safe usage, likely saving the lives of hundreds of thousands in the United States and millions around the globe. No, that didn't happen. Klaus Schwab saw fit to praise the Chinese. Yes, the same Chinese communists who in all likelihood created the virus and then allowed for its spread by locking down internal travel from Wuhan, while allowing it to the rest of the world. The same Chinese communists whose opening to the world was led by globalists Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski. Kissinger and Brzezinski saw fit to teach the Chinese how to set up an economy run by scientists, engineers, and managers, while at the same time depriving their citizens of any political freedoms. The Chinese citizens could have a fat belly and an expensive car, but they'd better have an empty head when it came to criticizing their leaders. From Schwab's COVID-19 The Great Reset. Aziz prompted Kishore Mahbubani, an influential analyst of the rivalry that opposes the US and China, to argue that COVID-19 has reversed the roles of both countries in terms of dealing with disasters and supporting others. While in the past, the US was always the first to arrive with aid where assistance was needed, like on December 2004, when a major tsunami hit Indonesia. The role now belongs to China, he says. In March 2020, China sent to Italy 31 tons of medical equipment, ventilators, masks, and protective suits that the EU could not provide. Mahbubani says that it is their choices, China and the US, that will determine who wins the rivalry contest, and that those will be based on the cold calculus of reason to work out cost-benefit analysis of what both the US and China have to offer them. Does it sound like Schwab has a nation crush on China? It does to me. As others have already said, the globalists love China. It has enabled them to put their ideas into practice on a massive scale without regard to human rights. Like our founding fathers, I believe our rights are an inheritance from God, who loves us above all things, and the attempt to create a society devoid of such rights strikes me as truly of the devil. I wish I didn't have to resort to such extreme language, but if I didn't, I'd be lying to you. I'm telling you what I think. We are not just the physical. All of us have to answer for our actions in this world. We are spirit, and the attempt to deny such a reality is the path to suffering and hell. Look at history and tell me I'm wrong. The fascists of Italy the Nazis of Germany and the communists of the Soviet Union all sought to restrict the rights of people and place the government as their god. When ideologues get in charge and tell you they must temporarily do terrible things, the atrocities just keep piling up. It's as predictable as the law of gravity. As with this comment from Schwab about how the pandemic, in which millions around the world died unnecessarily, should be viewed as an opportunity by those concerned about climate change. Some leaders and decision makers who were already at the forefront of the fight against climate change may want to take advantage of the shock inflicted by the pandemic to inflict long-lasting and wider environmental changes. They will, in effect, make good use of the pandemic by not letting the crisis go to waste. A famous statement attributed to Chicago Mayor and Obama Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel. The exhortation of different leaders, ranging from HRH, the Prince of Wales, to Andrew Cuomo, to Build Back Better, goes in that direction. As I've said before, the answer to any question for these globalists seems to be more globalism. Got a pandemic? How about managing it badly, then claiming you need more powerful government for the next time? These people really are shameless. Schwab also probably didn't realize that Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York would resign in shame on August 24th, 2021. Under a cloud of sexual assault allegations, likely scuttling any chance he had of becoming president of the United States in either 2024 or 2028. Maybe Schwab is betting on Prince Charles becoming King of England, where he will most likely be the least popular king in English history. I sometimes wonder if Klaus Schwab gets angry that he just can't find any good henchmen. That is the universal problem of most villains throughout history. It seems that idiocy is just part of the typical operating system of your average globalist. But not to worry, like any good supervillain, the globalists don't like to brood on past failures, but instead always look forward to the next wonder weapon, like a laser to blow up the moon, or in the real world, digital surveillance to finally achieve that long-desired control over humanity. Now that information and communication technologies permeate almost every aspect of our lives and forms of societal participation, any digital experience that we have can be turned into a product designed to monitor and anticipate our behavior. The risk of dystopia stems from this observation. In academia, it finds its expression in the research undertaken by scholars like Shoshana Zuboff. Her book Surveillance Capitalism warns about customers being reinvented as data sources, with surveillance capitalism transforming our economy, politics, society, and our lives by producing deeply anti-democratic asymmetries of knowledge and the power that accrues to knowledge. In plain language, that means when the government knows everything about you, then you are at their mercy. That's called an asymmetry of knowledge. In a better world, you know all about the government, but they know little about you. Klaus Schwab really doesn't like that world and makes it clear. It's probably not a surprise that Schwab would turned to his favorite globalist academic, Yuval Noah Harari, in order to justify this new tool. He quotes the Harari argument at length. Surveillance technology is developing at breakneck speed, and what seemed science fiction 10 years ago is today old news. As a thought experiment, consider a hypothetical government that demands that every citizen wear a biometric bracelet that monitors body temperature and heart rate 24 hours a day. The resulting data is hoarded and analyzed by government algorithms. The algorithms will know that you are sick even before you know it, and they will always know where you have been and who you have met. The chains of infection could be drastically shortened and even cut together. In fairness to Harari's article from March 2020, he does go on to detail the danger of such a system in the hands of a government that could also monitor your enthusiasm at a political rally or while watching certain shows, but the discussion doesn't seem to go any further. As an observation, I must note a pattern I've noticed in Schwab's work. He seems to acknowledge the arguments of the other side, but never really addresses them. He strikes me much like that boss who pretends to acknowledge the complaints of his employees, but never fights against upper management over their decisions. In Schwab's case, though, he's just pretending to be the manager. He's really angling to be the boss. He wants to be the one you complain to about being fired, but in reality, he's the one who made the decision. Another example of how Schwab and his globalist allies try to pit both sides against each other comes in the next section on governments and business. In this section, he tries to sound like a conservative. For all the reasons expanded upon in the first chapter, COVID-19 has rewritten many of the rules of the game between the public and private sectors. In the post-pandemic era, business will be subject to much greater governmental interference than in the past. The benevolent or otherwise greater intrusion of governments in the life of companies and the conduct of their business will be country and industry dependent, therefore taking many different guises. This might strike you as the initial setup of a conservative speaker, but it's not. This is the opening gambit of a fascist. Sure, Schwab wants to use the government for a while to achieve his aims, but then toss it overboard when his corporate buddies can fully implement their plans. And right on cue, Schwab comes up with his new idea, stakeholder capitalism. It will sound like he wants to be more democratic. He doesn't. It's just a trick to get more power into the hands of his buddies. The pandemic struck at a time when many different issues ranging from climate change activism and rising inequalities to gender diversity and Me Too scandals have already begun to raise awareness and heighten the criticality of stakeholder capitalism and ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations in today's interdependent world. Whether espoused openly or not, nobody can deny that companies' fundamental purposes can no longer be simply the unbridled pursuit of financial profit. It is now incumbent upon them to serve all their stakeholders, not only those who hold shares. Remember when I said that the globalists will use any issue to promote their plans? There's COVID-19, climate change, inequality, gender diversity, and now the Me Too movement, all part of the globalist plan to create maximum chaos and fear, the better to implement their authoritarian agenda. The issue really doesn't matter because the answer is always the same: globalism. In the world of the globalists, the pattern is always the same. The individual must be overruled by the power of the group, inevitably led by Schwab and his buddies. This is the form of a section. This is from a section of Schwab's COVID-19 book on the need for everybody to undergo an individual reset. Psychologists tell us that cognitive closure often calls for black and white thinking and simplistic solutions, a terrain propitious for conspiracy theorists, and the propagation of rumors, fake news, mistruths, and other pernicious ideas. In such a context, we look for leadership, authority, and clarity, meaning that the question as to whom to trust within our immediate community and among our leaders becomes critical. In consequence, so too does the countervailing issue of whom we distrust. For all their supposed brilliance, it's remarkable how little these globalists seem to want to engage in any type of intellectual debate. They simply want to prevent any debate from happening. The only question seems to be who has the authority to speak. After that, we're supposed to believe the words that spill from the mouth as if we were listening to the voice of God. When one is starting a relationship with a domestic abuser, the behavior can look much different from when one is deep into the relationship. People do not get into abusive relationships because they want to be harmed. It's because they are persuaded. The new person is charming, attentive, passionate, all things that may have seemed to be missing from the other person's life. But once the relationship is set, once there is some sort of commitment, the abuse can begin. The abusive acts will not be seen as common, but as an anomaly. Oh, that happened because we hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. Oh, that happened because he hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. Or, the fight wouldn't have happened if the other guy hadn't been checking me out. However, the actions tell you the truth. This is Schwab being persuasive to you, hoping you'll join with him. The deep crisis provoked by the pandemic has given us plenty of opportunities to reflect on how our economies and societies work, and the ways in which they don't. The verdict seems clear. We need to change. We should change. But can we? Will we learn from the mistakes of the past? Will the pandemic open the door to a better future? Will we get our global house in order? Simply put, we will put it into motion. The Great Reset. What is Schwab giving us other than a call to action with no substance behind it? It sounds warm and cozy, and yet it's maddeningly vague, at least when the television preachers give you such a pitch. They helpfully give you a phone number to call you so you can pledge your money. But you need to be aware of how Schwab plans to get to that good place. I don't want you to forget for a second the line in which he wrote, "No extreme scenario can now be taken off the table." With that quote fresh in your mind, I want you to consider the following passage from the conclusion of COVID-19, The Great Reset. The absolute prerequisite for a proper reset is greater collaboration and cooperation within and between countries. Cooperation, a supremely human cognitive ability that put our species on its unique and extraordinary trajectory, can be summed up as shared intentionality to act together towards a common goal. We simply cannot progress without it. When I read that passage, I am filled with fear. This is the key. They want your cooperation. Just like the vampire of legend needs an invitation to cross the threshold of a house, the globalist wants you to invite them into your lives. The globalists keep focusing on the words collaboration and cooperation because they don't want you to think about those who raise questions, the dissidents. The globalists don't like individuals or individual accomplishments because they prevent them from taking control behind a facade of all the people want this outcome. Just think back to your high school years and what the adults told you about avoiding peer pressure to engage in activities that might be harmful to yourself and others, like drag racing down the street at 120 miles per hour. Sure, you might have succumbed a few times to the peer pressure, but your older and wiser self asks, how the hell did I survive to adulthood? That's probably why the wildest kids turn into the strictest parents, because they know how easy it is to do the stupidest things. This is what Schwab wrote on the last page of his COVID-19 book, to make sure that if you disagree with him, you realize you're not one of the cool kids at school. These expressions of individual hope are supported by a multitude of surveys concluded that we collectively desire change. They range from a poll in the UK showing that a majority of people want to fundamentally alter the economy as it recovers, in contrast to 1/4 wanting it to return to how it was. To international surveys finding that a large majority of citizens around the world want the economy recovery from the coronavirus to prioritize climate change and to support a green recovery. Worldwide movements demanding a better future and calling for a shift to an economic system that prioritizes our collective well-being over mere GDP growth or proliferation. Do you get it? Everybody is demanding a better world. Get with the program. You don't want to be left behind. You might be forced to eat your lunch all by yourself in the high school cafeteria. But you know that's never how it goes when the uptight know-it-alls try to run a school. That's because you've got the stoners, the carheads, the jocks, and they can't stand the brown-noser student council perfect kids who cry if they don't get 100% on every test. It's why the globalists are going after the disruptive people like Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais, or Elon Musk. They can't stand anybody making fun of them. If that happens, Klaus Schwab and his goons, under the rubric of no extreme scenario can now be taken off of the table, are likely to take you behind the gymnasium and beat the hell out of you, or even worse. Did you think the easing of COVID-19 crisis would lessen the maniacal plans of the globalists? The World Economic Forum at Davos was canceled in 2021 and held virtually in January 2022, but they decided by May 2022 that it was safe for them to once again meet in person. This is how it was depicted in the media. The World Economic Forum 2022 is meeting in springtime rather than January when it's traditionally held, for the first time having been postponed on multiple occasions by COVID-19. Besides the novelty that the change of season brings, the World Economic Forum is meeting at a crucial time. In its 50-year history, the World Economic Forum has never been confronted with such unprecedented global issues as it now faces in 2022, as the world recovers from a global pandemic, grapples to contain the devastating impact of the climate crisis, and navigates a geopolitical storm following the invasion of Ukraine. For the globalists, it's always 5 seconds to midnight on the doomsday clock, and they're the only ones who can save us. If you're wondering what might transpire at a typical meeting of the World Economic Forum at Davos, let's look at what happened in 2022. On May 18th, Klaus Schwab held a talk with eager journalists who want to know what was going to be on the agenda for the globalists. In a world which is becoming more fragmented, more divided, and where many of the traditional multilateral organizations tend to become dysfunctional or at least mistrustful, a global platform based on informal, trust-based, and action-oriented cooperation will never be more relevant, more important than before, Schwab declared. More than 50 heads of state and government will attend the meeting next week, including NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, the World Economic Forum lists. Schwab may have wanted to present a warm and welcoming appearance to the rest of the world, but he wasted little time in letting people know that if they didn't behave, he was ready to use an iron fist. Schwab warned anyone who sought to trivialize the event or hijack its key messages, including the often mentioned Great Reset, will be treated with contempt. Contrary voices will simply not be tolerated. The atmosphere in which Davos takes place will be welcoming, but it is also of utmost seriousness, he confided. So there's no place for frivolous fringe that seeks to distract and divert attention, and I condemn it wholeheartedly, particularly of those who have nothing to do with the World Economic Forum community and just come to Davos to hijack our brand. It's a little disheartening to realize that more than 50 heads of state, as well as many more high government officials and heads of industry, attended an event that is so hostile to free speech. But Davos 2022 wasn't going to limit its disapproval of free speech to comments by their fearless leaders. Many of the participants seemed eager to follow Schwab's anti-free speech agenda, such as Australia's e-safety commissioner, Julie Inman Grant. Speaking to the World Economic Forum panel on Monday, Commissioner Julie Inman Grant spoke to the need to rethink various rights, including the right to free speech. We are finding ourselves in a place where we have increasing polarization everywhere, and everything seems binary when it doesn't need to be, Inman Grant said. So I think we're going to need to think about a recalibration of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online, from the freedom of speech being free from online violence, she added. The current Australian government seems to be committed to a recalibration of free speech. This is a truly terrifying idea. As we know it, means they will seek to ban or limit any speech that affects their political power. There can be little question that this is exactly what they are seeking. If one wonders if this is the actual plan, one need only consider what happened to journalist Jack Posobiec, probably one of the most effective and popular of the Davos critics. Heavily armed Swiss officers appearing from the Ordnungsdienst, I can't say that word, police force, allegedly frisked and detained Human Events Daily host and Turning Point USA contributor Jack Posobiec on Monday afternoon. The officers, who also told independent journalist Savannah Hernandez not to film them, claimed they have a right not to be filmed in Switzerland, despite there not appearing to be a federal law prohibiting people from filming police. This is typical for the globalists, who don't seem to let a little thing like the lack of a law prevent them from exercising their will. They apparently exist above any national laws. If you want a more authoritative take, one only had to wait for the talk by Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, now owned by Google. The article from Fortune magazine opened with this: "It's a precarious time for CEOs whose businesses have to juggle misinformation, free speech, and demands from employees to take a stand on global and domestic issues. For YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki, those responsibilities come on top of her efforts to grow the company with new competitors vying for screen time, the war in Ukraine, and an economic downturn that many predict will become a recession. Poor Susan. It can be so difficult to be a master of the universe when the peasants don't appreciate what you're doing." Hopefully, Susan tries to explain her thinking. In the crowd at Davos and the barbarians behind the gates, "There are a number of different ways we can look at this," she said. "The first would be from a policy standpoint. We would look at content that we would think about in terms of being violative of our policies. If you look at COVID," she suggested, "YouTube came up with 10 different policies that the platform said would be deemed violating, like saying that COVID came from something other than a virus." Wojcicki said YouTube did see people attacking 5G equipment because they thought it was causing COVID. That would be an example of content that would be removed. The second viewpoint, she continued, would be raising up authoritative information. If you are dealing with a sensitive subject like news, health, science, we are going to make sure that what we're recommending is coming from a trusted, well-known publisher that can be reliable. It is genuinely remarkable that in this day and age, where we have the best educated populace in our history, these big tech companies believe that they must resort to such censorship. The old understanding that good ideas will win over bad ideas in the marketplace of thought has been replaced by a mistrust of robust debate. The new answer seems to be to trust the experts, even if they're the ones who might have caused the problem or are profiting from this crisis. Besides destroying the centuries-old practice of free speech and empowering dictators to control information, there were new innovations introduced at Davos, like your own personal carbon footprint tracker, brought to you by the enlightened communist masters of China. Speaking at a strategic outlook, responsible consumption World Economic Forum panel in Davos, Alibaba Group President J. Michael Evans said that his company will be introducing more surveillance systems within China in order to usher in a so-called greener future.
We are developing through technology the ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint, where they are traveling, how they are traveling, and what they are eating, what they are consuming on the platform,
Evans said. Evans did not disclose if the data would be shared with the government. However, like with all Chinese corporations, Alibaba is beholden by law to provide data to the CCP, as it was reportedly pressured to do so in January of last year. Imagine that China has another way to surveil its citizens. As we have already discussed, China has been the experimental lab of the globalists for decades. How long will it be before Democrats in the United States will be calling for all of us to have these trackers? I imagine it won't be long, maybe 2 or 3 years. But while you find yourself interested in the attack of free speech or surveillance of your carbon footprint, you might be saying to yourself, I wonder what George Soros is doing these days. Well, even though he's 91 years old, he decided to show up at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2022 to give his thoughts. Billionaire George Soros warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine had rattled Europe and could be the start of another world war. Other issues that concern all of humanity, fighting pandemics and climate change, avoiding nuclear war, maintaining global institutions, have had to take a backseat to that struggle. Soros, 91, said Tuesday at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. That is why I say our civilization may not survive. Isn't it good to know that if you or I portentously say civilization may not survive, the media will attack us as calling for our listeners to stage an insurrection? But if you're George Soros and have billions of dollars, when you say the exact same thing, you're treated as a wise sage. However, predictions by Soros are often so wrong that one might be tempted to bet against anything he says. In 2022, this is what Soros was warning. Soros has previously used the World Economic Forum stage to unleash blistering critiques. At the last meeting in January 2020, he suggested without evidence that Facebook Incorporated might be conspiring to help re-elect Donald Trump, who lost the U.S. presidency later that year. If that's what Soros was complaining about in 2020, I'm likely to believe that civilization has a very bright future. I'll listen to Soros and immediately translate it into the opposite. And what globalist meeting wouldn't be complete? And what globalist meeting wouldn't be complete without Bill Gates talking about vaccines? A partnership between U.S. drug maker Pfizer and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to speed up the development of vaccines to prevent diseases that cause newborn mortality would also advance efforts to make a high-tech malaria vaccine. Bill Gates said at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland on Wednesday. Pfizer and the foundation will also work with Rwanda, Malawi, and other African countries to increase access to all of the company's medicines and vaccines for their populations. We have a dream for beating malaria, and we'll talk to the great mRNA companies, including Pfizer, about this. We could use the mRNA platform to make a really powerful malaria vaccine, Mr. Gates said. Yes, Bill Gates loves vaccines, and he is an enthusiastic participant at the World Economic Forum, where he gets to rub shoulders with the other rich and powerful people of the world. It would be so much easier not to call Klaus Schwab and his assorted friends around the world an evil globalist cabal trying to change humanity if they stopped acting like one. But it appears they can't help telling people exactly what they are. This is how Schwab's opening address to the World Economic Forum on May 23, 2022 was reported. On the evidence delivered on day one of the famous Swiss ski resort, Schwab very much sees his organization at the forefront of shaping the world of tomorrow. Unfortunately, outsiders have not been consulted or invited to join the 2,500 people flown in from all around the world to be present. Schwab was quick to praise those gathered before him in his welcoming address. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community, as you here in this room. We have the means to improve the state of the world. This is the game that Klaus Schwab and his cronies play. They don't want you to criticize their plans, but they go around bragging about their plans to change the world and their strength. But remember what they say about those who stand in their way. No extreme scenario can now be taken off of the table. It is time for us to finally see the globalists for who they are and what they want to do behind all their smoke and mirror tricks. That's chapter 4 finished. We gonna be done today. Hope you enjoy it. This is a fun book to read. Very enlightening. Shows you what's going on. Thank you, Uncle Alex, for writing this awesome book. And thank you for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe, comment. Thanks for listening. I'll be back later. God bless you.